Thanks to social, the world is getting smaller for you and me. For brands, the opportunities to develop truly global communities are growing exponentially. But one thing is certain, delivering social on a global scale is not simple. It's not just a language issue. There are cultural nuances, various social media platforms being used differently, legislation that needs to be taken into consideration. But we know one thing. The first step is effective listening. Here's Urim Greener from Big Fuel's analytics department talking about different techniques that lead to effective social listening on a global scale.
The first one is a local person that has the nuance to the culture, that can bring to the kind of the analytical or to the technology expert the uniqueness of the market, the cultural uniqueness to the market. And that brings me to the next component, and that is a tool, a listening tool, that can be manually trained as opposed to a machine trained, to then read through, potentially sometimes hundreds of posts, and in a very iterative process, train the tool to account for those different tones and cultural uniqueness.
After getting a real sense of what the target audience wants, some decisions have to be made. The big one is whether or not to go truly global or to keep channels local. Beyond Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, truly global brands must consider how local markets, cultures, and tastes all intersect. Let's listen in to Alyssa Waxenberg from Starwood Resorts talking about the complexity of rolling out a global network.
We call it internally the principle of following the sun. It can't just be 9 to 5 at the corporate headquarters time zone. You need people who are going to be present and active in your channels all the time, following, supporting languages, supporting different regions. So you really need to think about those areas, and then there's the tools that facilitate it. And depending on how you're managing your Facebook structure or your other channel structure, it's really a mix of probably some central teams and then extensions of those teams in local markets.
So how does a company decide? Here's some criteria straight from Selena Adcock, a brand partner at Facebook.
The thing I'd add is when brands come to me as Facebook, I usually ask about 6 questions on what they need to look at to understand how they should set up their pages. The first one is really about positioning in terms of what does your brand look like across different markets. The second is resource and org structure, and that's not just a question, it's more like we need to do a needs analysis, figure out what you're trying to do, who's gonna work on this so we can figure out the best way to set it up. The need for local versus global content, what's the balance there? How important is scale? Does it make sense to have all your fans in one place? Are you going to be supporting different pages with paid, owned, and earned? What other digital assets do you have that will support your page? For example, do you have a .com that has social plugins? Do you want to drive people to that .com as well as create stories with that .com? If so, where? Does it make sense to do it on a global page or a local page?
So what's the learning? Listen to what your audience really wants, and then decide what's best for your campaign. There is no machine. And there's certainly not just one way to go global.